There's more mischief, mayhem, and nefarious goings-on in the city of brotherly love than Billy Penn could have ever imagined. We've got it all here on the Twisted Philly podcast. True crime, haunted history, the coolest and creepiest places to visit. Welcome to Twisted Philly.
Hey Twisters, what up? I'm Dina Marie, host of the Twisted Philly podcast, and we're doing things a little differently today because I have a co-host. That's right, usually I'm solo, but today I have a very special guest, and I'm so fucking excited because I don't just get to hear her voice, but I get to see her beautiful face. I have a special host with me today who is someone that has become such a good friend. She is a host from the Book versus Movie podcast, the Fit Bottomed Girls podcast, and the Best Neighbors podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, Twisters, please give it up for Margot D.
Hi, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here. Dina, I can't believe we're doing this again.
I know we have been talking about recording together for months. Your schedule has been crazy. My schedule has been crazy.
Yes.
So Twisted Philly listeners think I'm busy. I've got nothing compared to what you've got going on. Margot hosts 3 amazing shows, and I listen to all of them. I love all of them. If I had to pick just one, though, it would be Book versus Movie because they are 2 of my favorite things. So, Margot, would you take a couple of minutes and tell Twisted Philly listeners where they can find you and your shows and how to catch up with you on social media?
Oh, thank you so much for the opportunity. And Dina, you've been on my show before because Dina is also a Stephen King fan like I am. But at Book versus Movie, we're the podcast that talks about films that are adapted from books. So we read the book, we see the movie, and my co-host is also named Margot, by the way. So it's a little, so we talk, like we just did Hidden Figures, you know, we did Jaws, we did Silence of the Lambs, we have a whole Stephen King series. Actually, Dina and I are going to go see the new It movie.
I know. I'm so excited.
And then we're going to go to my apartment and we're going to just do a live taping right after we see it.
Oh, it's going to be so good.
It's going to be so dope. So that you can find, and look into iTunes and Stitcher and everything. It's bookvs.movie podcast, and you can find us. The next one I work on is the Fit Bottom Girls podcast. If you're into fitness and health and like a female voice, it's the Fit Bottom Girls podcast. And then we also have the Best Neighbors podcast. I go next door to my neighbor every Saturday or Sunday for an hour, and we just seriously just shoot the shit and have a lot of fun talking about pop culture. And then you're helping me launch a new show because you helped me create the logo for my new show that's coming up. And it's going to be called Not Fade Away Podcast. And it's going to be about musicians and singers and songwriters and people in the music industry who are no longer with us. That's coming out soon. And I also have a full-time job, plus I teach fitness like half the time. So I don't know where I get my time either. Girl. I know.
I'm really looking forward to your new show. And, you know, Margaret and I were talking about Chris Cornell for a little while before we started recording. We're both big Chris Cornell fans. And as sad as it is, I guess he's going to probably wind up being an episode on Not Fade Away at some point in the future.
Yeah, totally. And if you guys want to follow me on social media, I think the easiest thing for me to tell you is follow me at Brooklyn Fit Chick on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. That's the name of my blog, Brooklyn Fit Chick. And then from there, you can find my other shows. But that's like the main space you can find me. And I'm thrilled to be here.
Margot has an empire.
One of them actually pays me, so it actually I know, right?
We need all these other projects to start paying us. It was during one of our recording sessions when you graciously invited me on Book versus Movie that you mentioned you are a fan of true crime. Would you share with us some of your favorite true crime podcasts?
Well, of course, it's My Favorite Murder. I mean, that, you know, everyone loves that one. I was an early adapter to that one. I like that one very much. I like Crime Town. That's a series on Gimlet.
Oh, I haven't tried that one.
It's pretty good. It's pretty great. It's all about Providence, Rhode Island, and it's all about the mobsters and the politicians. And it was beautifully produced. It was just exceptional. I really like that one. I like the Crime Writers podcast. That's what, I don't know if you've heard of that one, but it's a couple. They're both writers and they write for television. They write books about crime. And then they have special guests on. They live in New Hampshire and they just talk about crime news during the week. They're just wicked funny. It's the Crime Writers podcast. And, you know, Sword and Scale, I check in from time to time. I like Case File.
Oh my God. People go nuts for Case File. Everybody is always trying to figure out who he is, what does he look like, what is his name.
So what is that the thing? Like nobody knows who he is? No, like he's anonymous?
He's completely anonymous. And I don't know how that's possible because there's absolutely no social media presence about him whatsoever.
Oh, wow. So I also like Lore and Criminal. I think Criminal's a really great show. There's just so many to name, isn't there? It's a huge genre right now, but it's so interesting.
Oh, it is. And I think what's so cool is that everybody does things a little bit differently. Occasionally you'll hear the same story or the same case on a couple of different shows, but each host has a very unique perspective, which is really cool. So when you told me months ago that you were a true crime fan and you wanted to come on Twisted Philly and I wanted you to come on Twisted Philly, I really wanted to find a case that connected to your roots because you have a connection to Philadelphia.
I do. So my family in the 80s, we lived right outside of Philly. We were in a town called Malvern. And around there is Westchester and East Goshen and West Goshen. When I was there in the 80s, this is before QVC was a thing. Westchester was Cowtown. Like a bunch of my friends had horses and ranches and stuff like that. I don't know if it's still the same.
No. Well, I mean, there's certainly parts of Westchester and Chester County that are, that have a lot of farms and are underdeveloped, but there's so much that has grown up around those communities.
See, I know people who work at QVC and they're like, oh, no, it's like very chic right now. It's actually kind of expensive to live there.
QVC is like a mecca in Westchester, but the cool thing is downtown Westchester is so fantastic. It's quirky and quaint, and there's really terrific bars and restaurants and little shops, and of course, my tattoo parlor is in Westchester. What up, Doug from High Rollers? I found a case for us that has ties to where Margot grew up in Malvern and the Chester County area, and it has ties to something from where I grew up, actually my old high school in Newtown Square, Pennsylvania. So Margot and I are going to cover the story of Kevin Mengel Jr. For some families, Mother's Day and Father's Day are huge events. It's when the entire family comes together. There are grandparents, parents, kids, grandkids, cousins, neighbors. And for Kevin Mengel, it was a big deal. Father's Day in 2010 was especially important to Kevin. There was a huge family event planned with his mom, his sister and brother, their families, of course, Kevin Mengel, his wife, and his 3 young children. That day, though, Kevin's mom got a text from him saying that he left town. He needed to clear his head and he wouldn't be coming to their Father's Day celebration. To understand what really happened that day and why Kevin backed out of what was one of the most special days of the year to him, we have to go back in time a little bit farther. We need to get to know Kevin Mengel. Kevin Mengel was the older brother everyone wanted. He protected his little sister and brother, especially after their parents divorced when they were very young. Now, Margot, I know you researched this case right along with me. What did you think about Kevin as a young man?
Oh my God. And so handsome and so sweet and loving. And he really seemed to care about his family. Family was everything to him.
Yeah.
And that's why it really devastated him when his parents got divorced, because that just shattered his worldview.
Absolutely. Some of what his sister shared with the media was that the divorce of his parents hit him so hard as a young man that even when he was a teenager, he was constantly talking about when the day came that he would get married and he would never get divorced. In high school, Kevin Mengel seemed like the kind of young man that any girl would love to date. He definitely wasn't a player. He was unlike so many of his peers because he really wanted a serious, committed relationship. And a lot of teenage guys are not like that.
No, they're not. I would have looked for a Kevin. Are you kidding me?
Right? Oh, me too. And not just because of how cute he was, but this guy was a keeper. When Kevin Mengel Jr. was just 20 years old, he met and fell in love with a young woman that he would marry, a young woman named Morgan. Kevin's family initially described Morgan as a charmer and someone who was a real joy to be around. Margot, what do you think about Morgan and what Kevin's family thought of her?
Oh, absolutely. And she was very outgoing. They all said she was very perky and outgoing, like bright eyes. She kind of lit up a room kind of thing. Like she had a lot of energy around her. Yeah. And I thought that was good for him. They thought, like she'll be fun and spunky, and I think she's a couple of years older than him. Am I right?
Yes, you are right. I think she was about 4 years older than Kevin. Kevin and Morgan started their life together quickly. They had a baby a few months before they were married in August of 1998. And from that moment, Kevin reveled in being a father. He was committed to his family. He and Morgan had 2 more children soon thereafter. And he did anything he could to provide for his kids and be the best father and husband he knew how to be. And having a family at such a young age didn't seem to faze Kevin, according to his brother and sister. He always wanted to be a father, and again, he was so much more mature and so much more of an adult than typical young men his age. I think a lot of young men would buckle under that kind of pressure, and he didn't seem to have any issue with it at all.
No, he embraced it. He loved it. He was proud to be a dad. It was fun for him. It was great for him. It made him feel mature.
Margot, when I look at pictures of him online and you see photographs of him with his children, his smile could light up the planet. He is overjoyed when he's in the presence of his children.
You knew he loved being a dad. You could just tell it on the look on his face.
As a young father, Kevin was incredibly committed to providing a certain life for his family. He started his own business at a very young age. Again, another example, I think, of how Kevin embraced his role as a father, as you said, and stepped up to be the strong, confident adult that his family needed. Kevin Mengel Jr. opened his own landscaping business, and the name of the company was MKB Landscaping. And they were the initials of his children, Mercedes, Kevin Jr., and Billy. So even while he was at work, he was constantly surrounded by the reasons he was working so hard, and that was his children. So how is it possible that a young man like this, who was driven and committed to his family and his marriage, goes missing and skips out on what to him is the most important holiday of the year?
It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't, no.
You're right, Margot. It didn't make any sense. It doesn't make sense to you and I, and it didn't make any sense to his family either. From the first text message his mother received on Father's Day, Kevin Mengel Jr.'s family never believed he would simply disappear like that. Just a week before, he had talked to his brother-in-law about how much he was looking forward to the Father's Day barbecue with his entire family and, of course, his children. Kevin's mother and his siblings thought that something was truly amiss. They were texting him off and on for days, and Kevin was responding. And each time they would ask him what was wrong, he repeatedly said, "I need space. I need to clear my head. Give me the space that I'm requesting." But Kevin's father, Kevin Mengel Sr., had a different perspective on all of this. He thought about the ups and downs that Kevin and Morgan had in their marriage almost since the time they got married. As committed as Kevin was, it's not easy for a young couple to have so much responsibility so soon after their marriage. So Kevin's father thought maybe things got really bad between him and Morgan, and he truly needed some space to process what was happening in his marriage and come to some decisions about what he wanted to do. It was about 3 days after Kevin disappeared, 3 days after that first text that he sent his mother, that she went to the West Goshen police. And as you might imagine, the police did not submit a missing persons report. They didn't think that anything was at risk. Kevin was a grown man in his early 30s at this point, and grown men in their 30s have the right to step away from their family if they so choose. The police were also told by a local businessman in the town of Westchester that Kevin had been spotted. So they really believed he was still in town and just didn't want to connect with his wife or his family.
I'm sure they got like a lot of things on their plate every single day. And for them, like a guy that says, "I need my space," and taking off is not unusual to them. I'm sure they've heard it before. So and by the way, he was known to have a marriage that was very tempestuous and up and down. Yeah. She was a piece of work, and they had their arguments. So it's never crazy to think of somebody's like, "I need to let off some steam. I just got to go away for a few days." It's not crazy.
It's not, and everything you're saying is exactly what Kevin's father thought. He'd actually thought that Kevin's mother overreacted initially, especially because of the marital troubles that Kevin and Morgan had for years. According to Kevin Mengel Jr.'s sister and his friends, Morgan had a habit of leaving him, and typically that would happen around the anniversary of their wedding. But that's what contributed to Kevin's mother's concern. He was never the one who left. It was always Morgan. And each time she did, Kevin would take her back. Kevin would tell his friends and family that he still loved her, and he would do whatever he could to fix their marriage. Thinking of all of that, it was very hard for Kevin's mom and sister and brother to believe that he would finally have just had enough to be the one that would leave. And West Goshen police did talk to Morgan Mengel. Of course, Kevin's wife would be someone who should know what's going on. When they spoke to Morgan, she confirmed that she and Kevin had a huge fight, and this was just a day or two before Father's Day, and that Kevin told her he'd finally had enough. He did not want to stay in the marriage anymore, and he left. So between text messages to his family and text messages to his wife, the police thought everything was fine. And like Kevin's father, they also thought his mother was completely overreacting.
Which happens to women all the time, right?
Yeah.
People don't want to believe us. Yeah.
Absolutely. People think women can get a little emotional.
Which is bad, supposedly.
Right. We're emotional, or God forbid, we have our period. And what added to the police thinking she was overreacting was about a week after Kevin disappeared, he updated his Facebook status so that everyone would know he wanted to be left alone. So we have the Facebook status. We have texts that went to his mom and his siblings, texts that went to his wife. Each and every one of them were complete and utter bullshit.
Right.
Kevin had been murdered before Father's Day, and by the time his family started receiving the text messages and contacted the police, Kevin's body had been buried in a shallow grave behind Marple Newtown Senior High School, which was my alma mater where I graduated high school in 1987.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that's where I went to high school. And I have some friends from where I grew up who listen to the show, so when they hear this, if they don't know the story, they're going to be like, what? He was buried outside of our fucking school? Yes, he was. There was some construction going on for a new development going in the woods behind the high school, and that's the area where Kevin Mengel's body was buried. Very quickly, it was revealed that Morgan Mengel was the person sending the texts to Kevin's family. She fabricated texts from his phone to herself, and she was the person who had updated his Facebook status. How did this beautiful young husband and father wind up murdered on Father's Day?
Well, Morgan was, there's a guy named Stephen Chappelle who started working for them in, I want to say, the middle of May. Somewhere around May, and he's like 21, 22 years old, and I see pictures of him everywhere. God bless him, he looks about as stupid as the stupid gets.
Oh, God, yeah. He looks like a baby with a baby face who has absolutely no clue what's going on.
He's very gullible looking. He and Morgan have this flirtation that turns into a relationship, which ignites Memorial Day weekend. We're very close to that right now, aren't we? They start having sex, basically, and she tells him, I'm miserable, I'm upset, he's going to divorce me, but if he divorces me, I'm going to lose the kids, I'm not going to have a house, like, if I get divorced from my husband, I'm going to be screwed. So I just want to get rid of my husband. And she convinces him that they're in love. Like, she's like, I love you, and the text, like, you don't have to talk about the text.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. The texts are unbelievable.
Oh, my God. These two illiterate fools just like texting to one another, their devotion to one another. And then she basically convinces him to help her kill her husband.
And Morgan Mengel probably wasn't wrong when she had fears of losing her children, because she had a record for some criminal activity over the last few years prior to Kevin's death.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
There was one story about her stealing a blank check from a neighbor, writing it out to herself for cash for a few $100s. And fortunately, the neighbor didn't press charges against her, but there were charges for similar types of activity. So if she decided to leave Kevin, it's very likely he would have been given custody of their children. And that's because he would have been the more appropriate parent to have custody of those beautiful kids. There certainly was another option available to her, like leaving her husband, but really everything she had was wrapped up in her marriage and the landscaping business.
Well, she worked with him at his business, so she's not going to go out and get a job.
Exactly. She's used to minimal work at her husband's business. She's used to him being the provider. There's no way she's going to go out and get a job. And she's in her mid to late 30s, dating a young man for a matter of weeks who is 22 years old. And Margot already alluded to text messages. Here's the thing, folks. You may delete a text from your phone, but it never actually goes away. There is a string of text messages between Morgan Mengel and Stephen Chappelle that begin on June 15th, just a few days before her husband Kevin Mengel's murder. These messages not only detail the relationship, but it is literally a minute-by-minute, play-by-play leading up to Kevin Mengel's murder, the moment of the murder, and then the conversation that transpired in the hours and days after Kevin was murdered.
Yeah.
The text messages are incredibly damning. They document the conversation between Morgan Mengel and Stephen Chappelle when they agree to murder Morgan's husband, Kevin Mengel Jr. Their first action was to poison him. Stephen Chappelle found a recipe, of all things, online to make liquid nicotine, and then Morgan used it to poison Kevin's Snapple. Apparently, Snapple was something that he enjoyed very frequently, and he was the only person in the house that would drink it. On the morning of Kevin's murder, Morgan left the poisoned Snapple out on the kitchen counter and even went so far as to remind him not to forget to take his Snapple with him. She was so anxious about this that by the time Kevin and Stephen got to the landscaping business that morning, Morgan was already texting Stephen Chappelle asking whether or not Kevin drank the poisoned Snapple.
Right. Back and forth. Back and forth. Is he drinking the Snapple? Yes, he's drinking the Snapple. Is it hitting yet? I don't know. Like back and forth and back and forth.
Those texts were infuriating because Stephen was saying, yes, he's drinking it, but he's drinking it too slowly. It's not knocking him out yet. And then Stephen tells Megan through text, he has to go outside and measure something. The Snapple isn't having an effect, but I have a shovel. I think Megan and Stephen were hoping that the poisoned Snapple would take care of killing Kevin Mangle, and it didn't. And so Stephen Chappelle had to resort to other means. Kevin was definitely starting to be affected by the poison that he drank. He was starting to slow down, but it wasn't enough to kill him. Stephen Chappelle had 2 shovels on him at the landscaping shop. And when he noticed that Kevin was starting to demonstrate some physical reaction to the poison, Stephen then used both shovels to beat Kevin Mangle to death.
It's just horrifying to think about.
It is. It's absolutely heartbreaking. And Stephen Chappelle used so much force that he broke both shovels when he was beating Kevin Mangle Jr. And then realizing this, when you go back and read through the text messages, you see messages from Stephen Chappelle to Morgan Mangle that says, I just hit him. So they're texting one another in real time.
They're doing it in real time, like you said. They're saying it in real time. They're talking back and forth. Are you kidding? Really? You did it? I'll come right over. Oh my God, this is great. I mean, and they're texting to each other.
I know, it's crazy. They clearly had no idea that anything they were communicating to one another was going to be found or used against them. So the murder happened on the 17th, and for a period of about a week, Morgan Mangle is sending fake texts to Kevin's family, to his siblings, to his friends. She's using his phone to send fake texts to her phone. And by this point, Kevin's mother and his family really started pushing West Goshen police. But the police still don't suspect anything. They talk to Morgan again. She again tells her story about getting texts from Kevin. She shows the text to the police. But they do notice that there's a young man who's been lingering around the apartment. And of course, it's Stephen Chappelle. He wasn't just noticed by the police, he was noticed by Kevin's family because within a few days after Kevin's disappearance, his sister would drive by their apartment complex and she would see Stephen Chappelle laying out by the pool at the apartment in West Goshen with Morgan Mangle playing with the kids as if he is the new man in town. Basically, at this point, Kevin Mangle's family can't take it anymore, so his younger brother, Chris Mangle, decides to case the apartment. And sure enough, what does Chris find? He finds Stephen Chappelle moving around as if he lived there. Chris Mangle caught Stephen carrying Morgan's belongings out of the house. So Chris called Detective Maurer from West Goshen Police and said something doesn't seem right. My brother's wife and her new boyfriend look like they're up to something. The detective caught up with them at MKB Landscaping at Kevin's business, and he asked them to come to the police station for questioning. Before he could finish his sentence, Stephen Chappelle jumped into the driver's seat in Morgan's truck and took off. And all of this was captured on film by Chris Mangle. And between you and me, Margot, that's the kind of brother I want. I want someone who's going to sit outside somebody's house with a video camera to make sure that I'm okay.
Yes.
So stealing Morgan's truck, that would be an indication of something, don't you think?
He seems a little guilty. He seems like he's got some ants in his pants for some reason. Yeah, he just sort of takes off.
He did. And I think what happened was Stephen Chappelle, granted, he absolutely carried out the murder, but it seems like he let himself get manipulated by this woman. Like, I think she was the real evil mastermind here.
She is. I don't think he even had a record before. Like, I don't think he's had any kind of history of any kind of violence at all. And to kill a human being with an object in your hand, like right in front of you, and somebody you knew, it's just, oh my God, the depravity of that. It's just like he very quickly turned into this very horrible person. He did a horrible thing.
He did. He committed a horrible, depraved act of violence. But to your point, this was the first time he'd ever done anything violent whatsoever. When Stephen Chappelle took off in Morgan's truck, he got pretty far. He got all the way to Denver, Colorado, and it would be a little while before West Goshen police were able to apprehend him and bring him back. So in the meantime, they started questioning Morgan Mangle. One of the first questions that West Goshen Detective Maurer asks Morgan Mengel is, why do you think Stephen took off in your truck? The story that she'd been telling for the last week and a half suddenly changed, and instead of, my husband left town because he needed space, she began saying, I don't know, maybe Stephen knows something or did something to Kevin. At that point, all of the lies start to unravel and everything that happened starts to come out. But she starts slowly. She tells the officers about her affair with Stephen Chappelle, and Morgan is at the police station for hours. So after a while, she says she needs a break, and she asks if she can step out and have a cigarette. One of the officers joins her outside, and while she's outside having a cigarette, she just happens to say, oh, yeah, Stephen smacked Kevin in the back of the head with a shovel. Like, who fucking says that? Like, that's just some casual conversation at the police station.
Out there in West Goshen.
At this point, Detective Maurer gets pissed. He is furious. He starts yelling at Morgan, asking her, you've known about this for how long? And you lied to us. And you let this man live in your home with your children when you knew he violently murdered your husband. Morgan Mengel's response to those accusations was, oh, I never thought about it like that. I never looked at it that way. The police ask Morgan Mengel to write down a statement of events, everything that she remembers over the last few weeks, leading up to and including Kevin's murder. And at this point, she is still defending her innocence. She's still very much putting everything off onto Stephen as if it's something he did and she only found out about after the fact. As the police are reviewing her statement, they see a very strange word written almost stream of consciousness-like by itself, and that word is Snapple.
Yeah.
And then, of course, with the word Snapple, everything comes out. Their planning, the fact that Morgan asked Stephen to jump into this murder scheme, all of the text messages, and Morgan Mengel is charged with first-degree murder in the death of her husband, Kevin Mengel Jr. So the case goes to trial, and after about 5 days, on February 12th in 2012, the Common Pleas court judge ruled a mistrial because of comments that a West Goshen police officer made on the stand about a conversation that he'd had with Morgan Mengel's father. So the assistant district attorney asked Sergeant Michael Carroll about a discussion that he had with Morgan's father, a gentleman named Jan Wixon, while he was investigating Kevin's murder. Morgan's father said he wanted the police to know his daughter could be despicable and said a parent's condemnation of their own child is a damaging indictment. Because of these statements, the judge felt that this was prejudicial against Morgan Mengel and the jury would never be able to render a fair verdict. The judge didn't have an issue with the sergeant, but with the district attorney for asking about that conversation. The ADA was not happy with this, but of course, he had to respect the judge's decision. So a year and a half after Kevin was murdered, when the family finally thought they would get justice, the trial ends and has to start all over again.
I'm a Law and Order geek. You know, I watched that show for 20 years like everybody else, and I feel like I'm McCoy sometimes now I feel like I can judge, lawyers and district attorneys like, no, you can't say that out loud. It's totally prejudicial. You have enough, by the way, to convict this woman. You don't have to bring her father into it. It makes me crazy.
Well, and that's the other thing that the judge said with that text conversation. There was more than enough evidence in addition to physical evidence linking both Morgan and Stephen Chappelle to the murder. And speaking of those texts again, I'm going to post a link in the show notes to a website that lists the entire conversation. And when you think about scrolling on your phone or scrolling on your computer to read something, you are scrolling for like 10 feet to get through their text conversation leading up to and during and after Kevin Mengel's murder. So a new trial is scheduled for a year later, and in fact, it was almost exactly a year later to the day. The trial starts, and the day before Stephen Chappelle is scheduled to testify against Morgan Mengel, she changes her plea to guilty and spares everyone the need for a trial. And I think she realized that there was no way she would be found innocent between her confession and the texts and the physical evidence, plus Stephen Chappelle testifying against her. It really made sense for her to step up and take accountability for what she did and plead guilty. Stephen Chappelle was offered a deal in exchange for his testimony. The DA and the investigators while he was the one that physically carried out the murder, they believed that he had been completely manipulated by Morgan Mengel and caught up into something that was completely beyond his scope of control. He was a stupid, naive 22-year-old kid, and she fed his head full of love and lust and ideas that her husband was a monster, and none of that was true. The crazy thing about this deal was Stephen and Morgan were writing letters to each other while they were in jail, and one of the letters that Morgan sent to Stephen told him that she was pregnant.
Yes. And he thought he impregnated her.
And just what did Stephen Chappelle think about becoming a father?
He was psyched. He was going to be a father. And I think she started telling, I think she said she gave birth to twins,
yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yes, twins on top of that. And so he thought he was going to, and he told the cops, I'm so excited, I'm going to be a father. And then the cops would be like, no, she's been lying to you this whole time. She's never been pregnant. She doesn't have any kids. And then finally Stephen was like, okay, I'll, give testimony against her. But up until then, he was on the hook.
And, I want to say this poor kid, and I can't because he murdered somebody, but he believed everything she said.
It was crazy the kind of power she had over him.
It was. And one thing I want to point out was that while Stephen Chappelle did not get life, he was sentenced to between 40 to 80 years, and the judge made a point of telling him, even though we're not sentencing you to life, it is highly unlikely you are going to spend any of your life outside of prison. At his sentencing hearing, Kevin's father, Kevin Mengel Sr., said to Stephen Chappelle, "There's a part of me that feels pity for you. You are a stupid kid who fell prey to a black widow." And when you think about it, he was 22 years old. He hadn't been working at the landscaping business for very long. And right away, Morgan Mengel, who is an attractive older woman, shows an interest in him. It's like he didn't know what to do with that. I
thought one of the interesting things in their texts going back and forth is that he told her, I'm really worried I don't want the kids mad at me, because he himself was mad at his father when his parents got divorced. And we didn't mention this. Stephen's father committed suicide a few years before. So he's a damaged person. For sure.
You're absolutely right. And unfortunately, though, Kevin's mom was definitely not as forgiving as his father. Kevin's mom made a point of speaking up at the sentencing hearing, as did his siblings, and she said that Kevin talked about Stephen before he died. He said that he wanted to help him in his life and in his profession. She was quoted as saying that Kevin really believed in you, and instead you took his life and his dream of a family. Now there are 3 children without a father, parents without a son, and siblings without a brother. And when I think about that compared to what Kevin's father said, it's understandable. I mean, how do you find forgiveness in your heart for someone that took the life of someone that you love so very much? And the chief deputy district attorney, a guy named Patrick Carmody, said that he believed Stephen was truly remorseful for what he did. Both he and Kevin's family see Morgan as the mastermind behind all of this. She's the one who sent the fake texts. She changed Kevin's Facebook account. She pretended to be Kevin. And, there's cell phone records to prove it. During Stephen Chappelle's sentencing hearing, his attorney read a statement that was written by Stephen because Stephen was unable to read it. And I'm going to quote verbatim here. "I want to apologize to every one of you, as meaningless as that is. I am truly sorry for what I have done to your family. It is truly unforgivable, and I will never forgive myself. I should not be forgiven for what I did to your family."
Which is an apology. That's a real apology.
And he's right. It doesn't change anything.
Yeah.
But it feels like he truly understands the depth and magnitude of what he did. And he is truly remorseful and wishes that he'd never done it or that he could take it back.
It's amazing how quick it all happened, too. Like we said, their affair started, Memorial Day weekend. It's like 2 weeks later, he's killing the guy. It's unbelievable. It's like a whirlwind, this relationship. Yeah.
He hadn't even worked there that long. And she had already tried to find somebody else to help her kill her husband, and she couldn't. So it seems like she lured him in. Like she picked this kid out.
I think this is exactly what happened. Exactly. That's exactly what she did. She picked him out. She picked her mark, and he was the perfect mark.
As important as it is to acknowledge the remorse and the regret that Stephen Chappelle feels over Kevin Mengel's murder, you and I have already talked about this. The real tragedy here is Kevin and his 3 beautiful children who lost their father, his siblings who lost their wonderful older brother, his parents that lost an incredible son. And really all she had to do, Morgan Mangle, was get a divorce. You know, Margot, this reminds me so much of the Pamela Smart case.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
And she's so guilty, by the way.
Yeah.
Pamela Smart. Oh, yeah. She tries to play that she's not. She's totally, if you ever want to talk about her, even though she's in Rhode Island or whatever.
You know, and then you think about Stephen's deal, which, again, wasn't a deal because he murdered someone and he should be spending his life in prison, regardless of whether or not he was the one that orchestrated it. He certainly carried it out. And, you know, he was 22, maybe 24 by the time he got sentenced. So he would be 64 at the earliest when he would be eligible for parole. And who knows if they'll even give him an opportunity to get out.
It'd be very interesting. I mean, even if he got paroled, he's going to be in his 60s. Does he have any family? I mean, like, where would he go?
Right. Well, and here's the thing about Pennsylvania and life in prison. We have, I think, the second highest number of inmates serving life. We have the highest number of juvenile lifers. We have the highest number of female lifers. And, you know, this is just one more added to the list. And again, I'm not trying to diminish what Stephen Chappelle did. He took a life, and he took it in such a depraved way. It's not like when you kill somebody with a gun, which is equally as horrible, but it's something you can do from a distance. This, like you said, he killed somebody with his hands.
You have to get close to that person and do it.
Yeah, and that's what just sickens and saddens me the most, I think. And he didn't have to do it. He could have said, I love you and I want you to leave your husband, and if you don't leave your husband, I'm not going to be in a relationship with you.
And any reasonable person would do that. You know, any reasonable guy would just be like, this, you know, the sex is great, but she's out of her mind. You know, she's batshit crazy. Yeah. You know, I don't need that and 3 kids, you know, and all that stuff. Like, you know, nice knowing you, honey. I'm going to head to Philly and find me another girl. You know, right? It's just, there's something wrong with the guy.
Oh, I totally agree with you. And I know there are some guys that are into crazy, but this Morgan Mangle is an altogether different level of crazy.
Yeah.
And all of this took place in and around the areas where you and I grew up. Living out in the suburbs, people like to think they're immune from this sort of shit, but crazy, murder, crime, it happens everywhere.
Yeah, they absolutely do. Even on Paoli Pike.
Yep. Where Margot grew up in Malvern is about 10 minutes from where I live now in King of Prussia.
Yeah, I went to East Goshen Elementary, and then I went to Fugit Middle School, and then East High School, which is right next door. I was there for a couple of years, and then we moved to New Jersey. So I know all that very well out there. And
there's so much crossover in the tri-state area between PA, Jersey, Delaware, even up into New York, because everything's so close. It's so easy to get in and out of one spot from the other.
Yep.
Now Margot is in New York, which I have to admit I'm a little jealous of because, of course, I love my Philly. I love my Twisted Philly. But there is no place in the world like New York City.
You know, it's funny. I was on F This Movie, the podcast, and Patrick is based in Chicago, the host. And he's like, we were talking about You've Got Mail. And You've Got Mail is this whole love letter to Upper West Side, New York City, all that twee stuff. And he's like, what is it with all the goddamn movies about New York City and loving New York City? And I was like, I don't know how to explain it. If you like cities, they do it really well. Yeah. You know, they do it exceptionally well. And I love Philly. I mean, that's a great city too. I love Chicago. I like Boston. I love Toronto. And there's lots of places, but New York does it the best. I'm sorry.
Hey, I'm a big fan of New York. Yes, my heart is in Philly. I am a Philly girl, but I do love New York City, so no need to apologize. So Margot and I continued recording for probably another 10 or 15 minutes after that, and my computer froze, and the last 2 weeks were adventures in podcasting between my Skype recording, her Skype recording, my single recorded audio of myself, and then blending all of it together and realizing at the 11th hour that our final ending was gone. So, Margot, it was an amazing pleasure to have you on the show. I cannot wait to do this with you again, and I cannot wait until June 23rd when we start doing our recap episodes on Book versus Movie for The Mist. Twisters, I want to thank you for sticking with us through this sad story. I want to thank you for welcoming Margot into our world, and I really encourage you to check out her shows. Again, it's the Book versus Movie podcast, the Fit Bottom Girls podcast, which I definitely need because I got kind of a Philly ass going on here, and the Best Neighbors podcast, which is just a great time sitting, listening, talking with one of your best friends. And be sure to keep an eye on social media for her new show, Not Fade Away, about musicians and legends who are gone but not forgotten. That's it from me for today. Ciao for now, Twisters.